Okay, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the second in the Wirral Viking Trail series of lectures. The first one was Claire Downham in January, who talked about the early Vikings of Dublin and why they came, or why some of them came to Wirral. And so we've gone from one of the leading historians not just of the Northwest, but internationally, covering the medieval Viking-Age period. Sorry, Rob, I'm going to embarrass you now. One of the leading archaeologists and of particularly the Northwest. And we're blessed, actually, in the Northwest, having so many good people in history, archaeology, and in terms of Viking research and Viking things. Even though scientists myself have been allowed in, I think it's fair to say that history, archaeology, etymology, which is the study of place names and language, these are still the lead disciplines which scientists like myself contribute. So we're very grateful that Rob has agreed to give a presentation on the Vikings. Now, I think it's fair to say, Rob, the Vikings is not your main subject, because I think you describe yourself as a Romanist or Romano British, and then we've sort of enticed you into the early medieval willingly or unwillingly. I don't know, but there is a connection there. And actually, it's not just Northwest. If you look at Rob's portfolio, you'll see that he's done, made some great contributions in terms of the archaeology of the Caribbean and the Falkland Islands. In fact, one of your current projects is listed on researching the sugar plantations in Nevis in the Caribbean from the 17th to the 19th centuries. So that means you're still globe-trotting by the sounds.
Suntown is fading, actually. I got back 10 days ago, and
yeah,
Southport isn't quite the same.
No, but of course it's the Northwest which we know Rob mainly of, and if you look at his publications portfolio, it's very extensive. Although I suppose Rob's best known, first of all, for the huge volume. I don't know how heavy it weighs, but I haven't got my copy. Chaz Jones has got my copy with David Griffiths and Jeff Egan, which is this authoritative text on not that one, too soon, Sue. It's the Mells one I'm talking about, on Mells and the North Wirral Coast, which provides an extensive catalogue of the finds there in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then there's other monographs like the Huxley, remember that, Rob? With James Graham Campbell, and now you can show it, Sue. Where's Sue gone? This one, the book on Irby and the Irby excavations, and there's a nice story behind that, because that was launched at the Chester Viking Conference in 2010. Rob, I don't know whether you remember.
I'd completely forgotten this.
There was a book launch arranged by David Griffiths, our good friend, and Rob's done lots of publications with David.
He's got the big red book.
Pardon?
Somebody's got the big red book.
Oh, you got it. I thought Chaz had pinched it.
No, it's not. I haven't got it. This gentleman here has got it.
Oh, right. Sorry. Hang on. It's obscured by this icon. Oh, well done. Thanks ever so much. I thought it was Sue behind that. Brilliant. But the Irby book was launched in 2010, and it was supposed to have been David Griffith's book launch for his Vikings of the Irish Sea, but shamelessly, Rob and myself nipped in as opportunists we are, and we launched our own books, and I did mine on Viking DNA with Terry King and Mark Dobling, and you slipped in with the book. And David's such a nice guy; he let us in. But and of course, that conference was a great conference because it brought all the disciplines together, and I think that's when I first learned about the Irby and the Moreton excavations, and now everything's published from that. Although there's you mentioned work at Greasby as well. Anyway, I've spoken too long. Just to say that in terms of a very short biography, Rob is a Chesterfield lad. He went to school in South Staffs, University at Birmingham. He did his first degree and then PhD in archaeology, and then you got the job in Liverpool, the museums, 1984, same time I got my job here in Nottingham, and then became head of archaeology. And then more recently, he moved to Liverpool University to team up with Claire Downham, and in the Department of Archaeology, Classics, and Egyptology. Although you do work in continuing education as well. And actually, one thing that came out of that Irby presentation all those years ago, Rob, was the huge community involvement that you've been involved with. I think the Irby one in particular involved not just the community, but a huge number of PhD students or undergraduate students were involved
Yes.
with that. I remember you saying how you couldn't fit them all into the garden. So Rob has done a fantastic amount of work with the community, and is giving lots and lots of talks now, which is great. So anyway, and Rob also is.
Let's get him started.
Okay, go on then. Let's start. So it gives us great pleasure to introduce Rob Philpott and his talk on the Viking-Age rural settlements in Wirral, the Irby and Moreton excavations. One final thing, Rob. At the end, will you accept questions and things at the end of your talk?
I will, as long as I know the answers. Yeah.
Okay, I'll request people first of all to make sure that your microphones and cameras are switched off, and if you would like to ask a question, could you use the chat function, which is at the top of the panel. Right, Rob, over to you.
Great, thanks, Steve. That's a deeply embarrassing and
good
introduction, which I'll try and live down to. Well, let's make a start straight away then. What I'm going to be looking at tonight is the evidence for Viking Age material culture and settlement in the small peninsula that you can see there, the peninsula of the Wirral. And we're going to be focusing on that narrow area, which has a very rich and deep and rich Viking heritage. But just to set the scene very quickly, what I want to do is just show you the state of play by the late 9th century, when after the Viking raids first on the northeast coast of England at Lindisfarne in 793, by the 870s, the Vikings, the Danes, had occupied most of the north and the eastern part of England, and the Kingdom of York stretched from coast to coast in the north part of England. So by the 10th century, then the beginning of the 10th century, we have a situation where Anglo-Saxon Mercia and Wessex are under the control of the traditional Anglo-Saxon kings, whilst the Vikings had invaded and settled in those two other areas across the Kingdom of York and in Danish Mercia. So that's really the setting for the occupation of and settlement by the Norse of Wirral and of the northwest of England more widely. And this is a plan shown by drawn together by David Griffiths, which shows the broader scope of the northwest of England, southern Scotland, the eastern coast of Ireland, where you can see the extent of place name activity that shows the use of the Norse language in naming places. So that is really the broader scope, and then we'll be narrowing it down bit by bit. And here is a plan very out of date now, no disrespect to Ben Edwards, but in 1992 he drew a plan which showed largely the area of the northwest of England, which included Cheshire, Wirral, Lancashire up to Cumbria, which shows the extent very largely of Viking-Age sculpture. By Viking-Age sculpture, of course, we're thinking of a fusion to large extent of Anglo-Saxon and Viking styles of sculpture, creating its own particular characteristics and creating its own distinctive character of Anglo-Scandinavian sculpture. And you can see there, most of those dots on that map represent sculptural remains, very largely at churches, almost exclusively at churches. And then the others, those round dots, now are, of course, far more frequent as a result of the portable antiquities scheme and finds that have come to light since. But the sculpture really shows quite clearly on there. I'm going to skip that one because I was sorting out when earlier on and didn't quite manage to get everything in place. So let's look then. The background to our investigation tonight is the Viking-Age Wirral. We're looking at the sources of evidence that there are 4 Viking-Age or 4 Norse activity in Wirral, and we're going to be looking at the way in which we can understand the presence and the longevity, to some extent, of that Viking-Age settlement. And there are 5 main sources, and there they are: documentary accounts. We're very fortunate in having a rare account of, or rare complementary accounts from the historical record, which talk about the settlement of Vikings in Wirral. And then we have the place names, we have the sculpture. We've just seen Ben Edwards's plan, which shows the sculpture across the wider northwest of England. And then we have the material culture, finds, and those may be chance finds, there may be metal detected finds, or there may be finds that have come to light through other activities. And then finally, archaeological excavation. And I should probably put another one on here, because I think really serendipity has played such an enormous role in our understanding of Viking-Age Wirral that perhaps number 6 should be serendipity, happy accident. And I'll show you why there was happy accident in some of our excavations or some of our discoveries of Viking-Age settlement in the area. So just going through quickly, and Claire Down very brilliantly, I thought, talked about the Vikings from Dublin and the early occupation, the early settlement of Wirral. The dynasty of Ivar expelled from Dublin in round about 902, 903 AD. And here we are very fortunate in having complementary accounts. We have the Annales Cambriae, the Annals of Wales, which record the arrival of Egmont in a Viking leader, Egmont, in 902 on Anglesey. Doesn't really tell us a great deal more than that. But then we have a very extended Irish source, the Annals of Ireland, 3 fragments. And this is a very long, complicated story. Some elements may be ahistorical, some elements are embroidery, but there clearly is, as Wainwright showed in the 1940s, a strong historical core to those to that story, and where it can be corroborated from other sources. The Annals of Ireland, the Three Fragments tale, proves to be accurate. And this records that Ingemund, this Viking leader, a pagan, was expelled from Dublin around about 902, 903, and attempted to establish a settlement on Anglesey, corroborating the Annales Cambriae. Ingemund and his men were repulsed, and they went to Ethelflaed, daughter of King Alfred, who granted them lands to settle, on which he would build huts and dwellings near Chester, the document says. And the big question then, of course, is whereabouts near Chester, and can we identify where that settlement took place? As a historically attested piece of evidence, this is extraordinarily valuable. But Claire made the point in her talk the other day, a few weeks ago rather, that although we then tend to think of the origin of the Viking settlement in Wirral as dating to Ingemund's arrival in 902 or 903, it's actually very likely that in fact this was part of a process that had already set in motion before that. Vikings being Vikings, a few years later they looked at Chester, decided that Chester was more attractive, and they felt they'd been given a raw deal. So they tried to persuade Ethelflaed to hand over Chester, and funnily enough, Ethelflaed wasn't very keen to do that. So there was the attested siege of Chester, and the date I've got there, 977, is complete rubbish because it should read 907. Ethelflaed eventually repelled that attack from Ingemund. But this, as I say, is a rare instance of a historically attested settlement, but not necessarily the beginning of the process. So if we're trying to identify then where where Ingemund and his merry men ended up, what kind of sources can we use to see if we can identify that settlement area? And the obvious way to do that is to identify the place names that are of Norse Viking origin in the lowland northwest England. And here we have a plan or a map which shows two kinds of place names. They're the habitative names, places where people were living, that are named after, that are named in the Norse language. And then there are topographical names, which are referring to elements of the landscape. So the habitative names, by definition, are more likely to be places where people were living. And you can see straight away that there is a big concentration in southwest Lancashire, in that area here. There's an series of isolated examples in Cheshire, and then another concentration in the north part of the Wirral Peninsula. And if we look at some of those names, we can see what those places are, and those of us who live within the region will recognise a lot of place names that are well known that have this Norse origin. But let's just focus for a moment on the area of the northern part of Wirral, and there you can see a considerable concentration, quite a lot of BY names, and those BY names are in Old Norse, may be a village, but probably in Norwegian they're more likely to refer to a farm. And so we have places that are quite familiar in Wirral: Frankby, West Kirby, Wallasey, which used to be called Kirby and Whaley, Irby, Pensby, and so on. And then just to draw your attention to two particular names, one of them, Raby down here, is a place name that means farmstead at or near a boundary mark. So there appears to be some sort of boundary. And if we look across the River Mersey here, and we look at southwest Lancashire, we have Roby, and that is exactly the same origin. So we're looking at a settlement farmstead at a boundary, and both of those places, those areas, also have a Thingwall place name, and Thingwall comes from Field of the Assembly, which is the administrative centre the place where laws were made, where justice was dispensed. And it's exactly the same origin as Tynwald in the Isle of Man, which was the parliament, effectively the parliament for the Isle of Man, and the Thingvellir in Iceland, which was the same thing, the meeting place of the assembly, where the assembly met. And here we can see a whole series of these place names. We can see Mells, we'll be looking at in a little bit more detail in a moment. Irby, very interesting place name here, Irishmen's Farm. So farm of the Irishmen. And if we're looking at that settlement, which at least part of that settlement under England came from Dublin, came from Ireland, it is intriguing then to see that a Norse place name refers to Irishmen settling on a farm. And again, we'll look at that in a little more detail. But there are a whole series of place names. Some of them are mixed place names, and they have Old English and Old Norse elements, like Staunton, which is a hybrid place name with big and tun, or which means farm or farmstead. So the place names then give us a very good indication of where that Viking settlement took place, and also because of the Raby place name, its geographical limits too. And here we have at Cross Hill in Thingwall, this is the probable Thing mound. This is almost certainly the mound of the assembly, and it looks like nothing at all from the fence, but when you get closer to it, it is quite a prominent and distinctive mound, and it's very likely that this would have seen the assembly of the self-governing community of the Viking of the Norse-speaking people in northern Wirral in the 10th and 11th centuries. So another form of evidence then is the sculpture, and here the fusion of Anglo-Saxon and Viking styles of sculpture resulted in distinctive Anglo-Scandinavian forms, which included this kind of hogback gravestone, of which an example appears or was found in the 19th century, the 1860s, at the church, the parish church in West Kirby. And of course, armed with the knowledge that the BY names very likely refer to, not absolutely every time, but very likely refer to Old Norse settlements. It's very interesting to see that the parish name acquired a Norse name, probably by the 10th or 11th centuries. And here, this 11th century hogback gravestone deserves some attention for two aspects of its form. One is these little tegulae, or they're shingles, wooden shingles on the roof. And the other is that the form of that, with a hogback, which is this curved back at the top, and also has very slightly bow-sided or bow sides in its length. So the sides bow out very slightly, they're curved. And what we're seeing here, well, let's just go down and see. One of the things we're seeing is we're seeing the shingles on the roof, which are wooden shingles, just like at Urnus in Norway, in the 12th century church there. But the other element of that is it is the form of a house, and just bear that in mind, because we may be looking at a house form that resembles this hogback tombstone a little bit later on. And then there are other Viking hogback stones. There is another hogback stone from Bidston recently discovered, a very small one, but with very interesting connections here to Brompton in North Yorkshire. And it's quite clear that the connections of the people who are commemorated in Wirral are with people in North Yorkshire, across in York, across at the Kingdom of York. And it's very interesting to speculate about the status of the individual who is buried in this parish church here at Bidston, another of the Wirral parishes. And then looking at sculpture, 50 or more fragments of Anglo-Scandinavian sculpture were photographed in the early part of the 20th century. And unfortunately, the Vicar of Bromborough decided that they would be more useful as hardcore for a path, and they seem to have been ground down almost entirely, although one was found by my former colleague Mark Adams in the rectory garden at Bromborough just a few years ago, one of those that was shown on the original photo. But here we have a cross shaft, probably again 10th or 11th century in date. And then we have further south in Wirral, we can see Anglo-Scandinavian sculpture here, where there are no fewer than 5 very important stones with decoration on them, which are an intriguing mixture. There are probably 4 stones represented, but one of them is a priest, the top right, with his maniple and his leather satchel. The bottom right is an angel looking, as Claire pointed out, with rather heavy footgear. I think those are Doc Martens, if I'm not mistaken. And then on the left-hand side, you can see a hunting scene. So a very nice and interesting fusion here of Christian symbolism on the right-hand side, and then Norse mythology on the left, with a hunting scene where the stag is being speared by that character and a hound tearing at the stag's throat. So again, we can see that the iconography is drawing on both Christian imagery and on Norse mythology. So if we try then to understand where the people were living in Wirral, this becomes more of a problem. And this is an illustration from as you can see, from the Northwest Regional Research Framework, the resource assessment by Rachel Newman in 2017. And this shows the sites that she was able to talk about in her text with any degree of length. And this was for the early medieval period as a whole, which is really from the beginning, from 400 AD through to 1066, the Norman conquest. And for that whole period of over 600 years, the number of sites that she was able to talk about was extremely small. Helena Hamerow lamented that regrettably few ordinary farmsteads of 8th to 10th century date in northwest England have been identified, and still fewer excavated. And that statement in 2012 remains just as true today in 2024, that for that whole period of 650 years or more, it is very, very difficult both to find farmsteads, to find the rural sites, the sites where people were living in the landscape. It's difficult to find them, and then even fewer of them, of course, have been excavated as a result of being discovered. And one of the key problems there is the nature of the material culture. So it's the nature of the finds that were being used on these rural settlements. And we can see from, as we will see in fact shortly, we'll see that actually the main ways in which sites are discovered, which one of the main ways is certainly the presence of artifacts of a particular date, are almost absent for the early medieval period. I read another quotation recently about how the early medieval sites were distinguished almost entirely by pottery and bones and nothing else. And that was true for the east and the south of the country. It becomes even less true in the northwest when the bone doesn't survive because of the acid soils, and they didn't make much pottery. So if those are our two main ways of discovering the sites of this period, you can see that this is going to prove a bit of a challenge in the northwest of England. So let's look then, just get a quick view of the sites we'll be looking at, and you can see the Wirral Peninsula here in the centre, and you can see I've just highlighted a few sites: Mells, Moreton, Greasby, Irby and Hilbury. Rather more than I told Steve I was going to talk about, so I'm going to have to rush on. But just to look at the material culture a little bit more widely, let's look very quickly at the Curedale hoard, deposited in 905 AD. And this is a fantastic example of a silver hoard, 40 kilos of silver, deposited 905 AD with a mass of silver bullion. And you can see here the material, the silver artifacts converted from artifacts of aesthetic quality to bullion. They've chopped them up, and with no regard to their aesthetic appeal. And that was found in the bank of the River Ribble, further north from near Preston, in southwest Lancashire. And then coming closer to Wirral, the Huxley hoard of Viking silver, which is a 1.5 kilos of silver, found 20 years ago now, which again has a very interesting origin. And that origin, when you look at where this kind of broadband arm ring is manufactured and where those broadband arm rings have been deposited in hoards, it's very clear that this is Irish silver. This is a Viking craftsman working in a Scandinavian tradition, but in Ireland. And so the Huxley hoard of Viking silver then has come from Ireland. And this is a theme which seems to be persisting as we talk more about the Viking connections with Wirral. There you can see just a map to show where these hoards of various types have been found. But you can see that little cluster down in southwest Lancashire and in Cheshire, showing the hoarding of Viking silver during the 10th and 11th centuries. And then we get chance finds. And I was sitting at home one day on a Sunday morning when I had a call from a metal detectorist friend who said he found some finds and wants to come around and show me that I might be interested. And he produced this. And if I hadn't been sitting down, I'd have fallen off my chair, because it was really a most interesting, most unusual find, a silver ingot. And then he produced another piece of silver, which was a piece of hack silver bullion from the same field. So it's quite clear that somewhere in South Wirral there is silver working is going on. And the Vikings had a silver economy. What they were interested in was the purity and the weight of the silver, not the as much as the aesthetic qualities of that silver. So hence this constant desire to chop the silver up and make smaller pieces. And then other finds that have come up in the last few years, and these are Wirral Archaeology's finds, and these are some extremely interesting new finds that are coming up, includes a series of strap ends, and the dating of those, some of the dating is quite broad, but you can see these are early medieval finds. They are very likely to be Anglo-Saxon or in style, but they may well have belonged to people who would have identified themselves as Viking. But nonetheless, even though we can't be sure either way, what we can say is that this is part of the settlement activity in early medieval Wirral. And again, some extraordinary finds that that look so alien and so out of place until you think of the way in which the Viking silver economy and the Viking trading connections ran down as far as the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. There is a famous Viking runic inscription in Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, scratched by some Viking who was on some trading mission to Byzantium. And here you can see the top one is a silver coin, silver dram of Sasanian origin, and then a silver dirham minted in Baghdad. And it's very interesting that the silver analyses done on silver from the northwest of England shows very mixed sources, which includes these Middle Eastern sources. Some of the silver is coming from Afghanistan, a tribute to the long-ranging connections of the Vikings. Again, these are all Wirral Archaeology finds, and I'm grateful to them for putting these on the Portable Antiquities scheme. So that they can be, the information from them can be used and incorporated into our understanding. And then here, there are a couple of lead items. They may be weights, they may be gaming pieces, but they are a style of lead object that seems to be associated with winter camps from the eastern part of England, and they're part of a tradition of lead items like this, which are commonly associated with Viking activity. So those are some of our individual finds, or small groups of finds. The hoards are clearly collections of finds, although each one is an individual find in its own right. But now we come on to looking at a site which has produced, well, at least 10,000 ancient artifacts. And this is the site at Mells on the North Wirral coast. And the site at Mells was discovered during the 19th century by people walking along the shore and picking up bits of metal and other items that were deposited on the shore as a result of the coastal erosion at a place that used to be called Dove Point. Well, it's still called Dove Point, but I always think Dove Point doesn't have much, is a bit pointless because it's now not a point at all. It doesn't stick out. But the 400, 500 meters of coastline that were lost within a space of about just over 50 years, that very rapid erosion produced, as I say, at least 10,000 ancient artifacts, many of which were put in the Grosvenor Museum and remain there. Some went to Liverpool Museum, some were lost in the Blitz. There are others in Warrington and the British Museum too. And those collections of finds from there include large numbers of very small artifacts like this. There's very little pottery, interestingly, but because the pottery is less dense, it's the dense metal artifacts that during this process of erosion tended to get deposited on the shore, and where they could then be picked up by the antiquarians. And the antiquarian par excellence, who was responsible for recording the finds from Mells, was the Reverend Abraham Hume. And he was vicar of a little village near Liverpool that probably nobody's heard of, which I believe is called Everton. And he, in 1863, did a fantastic compilation and analysis of the finds that had come from the shore at Dove Point. Dove Point now, as I say, is somewhat pointless, but you can still see that tidal channel that runs along the end of the peninsula. And where those little white dots of boats are would have been well inland, but out here, somewhere out here, would have been the original coastline during the Viking-Age. And what we can see at Mells, just to go back briefly, what we can see at Mells is a very long-standing settlement, or series of settlements, that started in the Iron Age in at least the 4th or 5th century BC, ran through the Roman period, completely all the way through the Roman period, into the early medieval period with Byzantine coins coming up from there, and then into the Anglo-Saxon period too, where you can see these little hooked eyes of very distinctive Anglo-Saxon style, probably 8th century in date, and then a silver penny minted in Chester under Edward the Confessor. And these are just a small group of the many early medieval finds that David Griffiths has analysed and catalogued in great detail in the fat red book on Mells that Steve alluded to earlier on. Here you can see on the left, this is a plate from Hume, and you can see some of these ring-headed pins, which are very characteristic of Viking style. Very characteristic. They were made in Dublin, so very characteristic also of that trade. And I'm going to move on quickly because I'm running out of time now. But you can see buckles, strap ends with the, again, very distinctive animal head design, which is very typical of Viking art styles. And then a ringarike, early 11th century ringarike dragon on the side of a mount, which would have protected a stirrup. So we're seeing here then objects that are very clearly Viking in style, that are being transmitted across the Irish Sea. This is an Celtic Irish piece of metalwork. And so that connection with Ireland and the trading connection through Mells remains strong. And what Mells was doing was operating as a beach market, a market where at prearranged times people would have pulled up their boats on the beach and engaged in trading and in all sorts of other activities which involved meeting people from the eastern part of the country and also from the west, from Ireland. So this is Mells became an important trading port. It had one of the fairly rare, at the time I think it was one of only a handful of Hiberno North cut halfpennies from England, and this shows how you got a halfpenny in how you made your small change in England in the 11th, 10th, and 11th century, which is you took an axe and whacked your silver penny down the middle. And I'm sure that those of you who can visualize that could work out how you got a farthing. Other evidence of trade then is this little Viking scale attachment from Mells at the top, which matches up very nicely with the merchant's balance found at Gear in Argyll in Scotland. And you can see that all we have is that one little fitting, but this is part of a merchant's scale balance. And then we can see as well a Viking burial group from Mells, the shield, boss, the axe head, and then the bent over spear. So let's look then at the first of our sites, and the first of our sites is going to be Irby. And this is a site, this is where serendipity played a part. Serendipity was probably our most valuable fieldwork technique, because serendipity, happy accident, played a role in almost all the sites that we found, as you will see. Here we are digging in the back gardens of 8 separate houses. And what we're looking for is a Roman site that was found when this kitchen extension was built in 1987. And we began to dig a small number of holes just to see if we could find more of the Roman pottery that was obviously sitting in a buried ditch. And we discovered a buried ditch that ran across here. Turned out the lady who owned that, her brother owned next door here and the end of this garden, and he owned this house too. So we dug 46 trenches over the space of a few years with students from the University of Liverpool, with English Heritage funding, National Museums and Galleries funding too. And you can see that some of our trenches are open on this site. It was a very difficult site to fit together, very complicated, very hard to see the features. But there, straight away, you can see a wall running across the middle of the site and a large number of undergraduates beavering away to record that evidence. So we were looking at a Roman site, or so we thought. We found a Roman farmstead, we found Roman pottery, and that was exactly what we were looking for. We had students who were sieving for charcoal for environmental analysis and then carefully cleaning up the site. And we have on the but what we were initially looking at then is this Romano-British enclosure. We're looking at a farmstead of Roman date, and there we have a quern tossed away when it was broken into the ditch which ran around the settlement. And in the bottom we have the enclosure ditch again, partly backfilled with a very clearly defined palisade slot. And there's the gateway of the Roman enclosure entrance. Those massive post holes showed us that we were looking at a Roman site. And there we are, the round houses, very typical of Roman, Romano-British houses in the 2nd and 3rd century AD. We got carbonized grain from Emma and Spelt. We got spindle whorls, coins, and even published the site, as Steve again very kindly mentioned earlier on. But we had some enigmas. We had some features that we couldn't really assign to the Roman period, and it was difficult to work out what they were. But my colleague Mark Adams, who undertook the stratigraphic analysis, worked out what the layers were and very carefully unpicked the layers, identified a series of buildings that appeared to be sitting on top of our Roman site. They had used the Roman site. All of the features, these gullies that you can see on the right-hand side here, all of these gullies were full of Roman pottery. Well, of course they were, because they were dug through a Roman site. But what we could see was that these features that all appeared to be curvilinear in form. There's a curvilinear end of a building. There's a sort of junction of two building remains, and there is that. This is this same the plan of this part of the building here. All of these appeared to belong to the same phase of activity, but it was certainly post-Roman, and it was only when Julie Edwards from the Grosvenor Museum was walking past a table of Roman finds, which I'd laid out, and I said, and here we have a nice Roman lamp, and she said, I think you'll find, and that's weasel words really, because I think you'll find means you are a complete idiot. But you are a complete idiot, Philpott, because what you're looking at is a Saxo-Norman spike lamp, and this is a type of lamp that dates from 900 to about 1200 AD. So I thought, that's interesting. So we have early medieval activity, potential Viking Age activity. I looked at where it had come from, and it had come from one of those building gullies. So that then unlocked our understanding of the site. So that whole phase of activity that we'd seen with those bow-sided buildings, which looked just like that hogback tombstone that I showed you from West Kirby, the spike lamp showed that we were dealing with a Viking Age building or series of buildings, an occupation phase. And here again, another in the foreground here, this building, stone wall building, is also early medieval in date. So we had at least 5 buildings that were very likely to have been in closely contemporary occupation, sitting on a Roman site. And the question then is, what are the parallels? What do they look like? So we looked at Scandinavian longhouses of Viking Age, and we started to see that all over the Viking world, in the Viking Age, in Orkney, Shetland, the Faroes, southwest Norway, they were constructing buildings with those long curving sides and rounded ends, bow-sided buildings that looked extremely like our houses at Irby. So then we began to look at the place name evidence, and place name of Irby is Farmstead of the Irishmen. Well, it looked to me as though we had found the very farmstead of those Irishmen. And why are they Irish? They're Irish because they are people coming over with Ingemund, or in the wake of Ingemund, who are some of his Irish retainers, who are retaining their Irish language. And it's very interesting to see, because our excavated site is there in the centre of the map, but you can see that the neighbouring township here is Arrow, and that comes from a Middle Irish name Irby, which refers to a shealing or summer pastures. And then close by is Noctorum, Dry Hill, another Irish name. So what I think we might be seeing here then is our Irishmen are not only living and occupying this site here in the centre, but they're also farming, or they're using as pasture the land in the neighbouring township that's now Arrow Park, if any of you know the local terrain. So very interesting then, we can start to unpick a little fragment of Viking Age landscape in Wirral. So let's look nearby, and again, serendipities coming in here, because in 1987 we were looking at the site of a medieval chapel, first mentioned in 1345 in the township of Moreton, about 5 kilometres away from Irby, quite near to Mells. And here we looked at the chapel site, and we decided before this site was developed, that we ought to do an excavation and see if there was any evidence of this chapel. And here, extraordinarily, in this 1665 map, it's not a very good reproduction, but you can just see that chapel with its little gable ends and the belfry at either end. So it was there until about 1680 and then fell out of use. It is a case of nominative determinism, because we are digging here, there's our trench, on Dig Lane, which actually is interesting because it's a medieval English term for a ditch, and that is precisely what would have been around that medieval chapel. So we failed completely to find the medieval chapel, which was a bit of a disappointment. It was a bit of a disappointment in January 1987 when we started, because it was absolutely horrible. And we dug 4 trenches, and in one of those trenches we spotted an archaeological feature. You see, these are plough furrows. This is the boulder clay, so the natural clay, and then there's a feature cutting across which has been filled in, and this is part of a building, the remains of a building. It's a beam slot for a building. This is part of an ornamental pond from the 20th century house that was on there subsequently. So you can see we're looking at various phases of activity, but a phase of the line that runs across the middle there is an early medieval feature. And we began to find as well other early medieval features. We found that the building remains had been enclosed by a ditch, and there's the angle of the ditch. You can see we've taken out sections of the ditch where it comes down to the clay, and this is the infill of the ditch, and this is the corner of a ditch that was in operation in the 9th century AD. We had radiocarbon dates, and we had a coin that came from the top of that feature, which give us a very clear indication this is a 9th, possibly 10th century, 10th century feature. And then at the bottom right, you can see another building. This is building number 7 of a whole sequence of structures that were successively constructed on the site of an earlier building. The place remained in use, this little enclosure remained in use for possibly 300 years. But the building at the end here, which is this dark, has this very dark stain in the ground. This was the remains of a massive dump of burnt grain, and it's very likely Dr. Sue Stallybrass at the University of Liverpool made a very sensible suggestion when I was failing completely to come up with an explanation, and that is that this was grain that had been stored in a loft above the house, and because this is a house, and had burnt, the house had set fire and depositing that burnt grain into the hollow of the floor of the house. And as a result of that, then we were able to get radiocarbon dates from that grain. But you can see here, this was a site plan that I drew many years ago, but how complicated and how fiddly and how dense that occupation is. You can see that ditch that runs around here, and it was cut, and then it filled in, and then it was recut, and then it was recut again. And inside that enclosure was this sequence of buildings. But the building that was most intriguing was this one with the dark fill with that burnt grain. And you can see the remains are extremely slight, but they are real. These are features that have been created by people a long time in the past. And what we were actually looking at was the remains of a structure that was almost certainly wattle and daub, and had left the quite distinct traces of the structural plan, not complete, but certainly in part. We could see as well the remains of an early medieval oven within that building, and you can see the burnt clay, which was part of the oven superstructure after it had collapsed, and that was still in situ in the centre of this house. The finds from the site were extremely thin. When I said at the beginning that it was very difficult to find these sites, this is almost the complete early medieval material culture assemblage from this site at Moreton. Having said that, it is a very interesting one, but it does show that very small numbers of durable artifacts may be the only evidence you will get from several hundred years of occupation. So that always makes me think very carefully when I see individual finds, because if they're individual Roman finds, you might say, oh, that's just background scatter. If they're individual early medieval finds, they may be the only evidence of something much more significant. And here we can see a hone used for sharpening pins or knives on the left. Very distinctive type of early medieval hone. A unique silver penny of Edwig, probably from Exeter or Barnstaple, in the southwest of England, so it had come very considerable distance, probably through the port at Mells in the 10th century. and then a spindle whorl as a counterweight that acted as a counterweight on a wooden spindle. And then here, this is the phasing of our site drawn out so you can see how the site develops. And you can see at the top how the ditch curves around, creating a right angle. And then the ditch is recut in phase 3 and top right. And then the ditch is recut again in phase 4. And by phase 6, it's gone. The ditch is filled in. And here is our structure with its burnt grain lying in the bottom. And I've coloured those in so you can see the outline of the wattle lines within that structure. But one of the important things is that in phase 3 we had grain and we had the coin which dated that ditch to the 10th century AD. So we're looking there at exactly the period of the Viking Age, exactly the period of Ingemund and his band of men settling in Wirral and settling down in Wirral. So that is from that era. And unfortunately, we have very little building evidence, but this is part of a sequence of activity that ran into, as we can see here, into the 11th or 12th century, possibly even as late as the 13th century. And this is intriguing because this little structure here has more than a passing resemblance to Pat Wallace's Dublin building type 1. This is a style of building that was in operation in the 12th century AD in Dublin, where you have a central area, a central hearth here, and then on either side, benches formed by wattle, lines of wattles, where you have low benches on either side. And it's it may be pushing the evidence beyond what one might legitimately do, but certainly there is more than a passing resemblance, I would say, to that building style. So we have, if that's the case, if I'm right, and this is a style of building that was current in Dublin in the 12th century AD, it may explain the presence on the site at Irby of one of the few finds that we have, piece of Irish pottery, Leinster cookingware, of the 12th or 13th century. And this again is Julie Edwards, who's very kindly identified this material for us. But it does indicate during that 12th century period that those contacts with Ireland that had been formed in the Viking Age in the early 10th century remained in operation. And indeed, when you look at the Domesday book for Chester, one of the items of trade that comes into Chester in 1087 was marten skins, pine marten skins. Where are they coming from? Maybe from Ireland, maybe from Scandinavia. And then let's move on again, because this is evidence that I've shown you so far. We have 2 excavated sites, both of them running through the Viking Age, and both of them providing us with evidence of rural settlement. They tell us a little bit about the material that people were growing in terms of the grain from Moreton. And they also tell us about the poverty of durable material culture that we can expect to find on these sites. But let's look at a couple of more sites, and I'll just draw your attention here to Hilbury Island, that tiny speck in the Dee estuary, and then a site at Greasby. So we'll be looking very quickly at these. And first of all, there's Hilbury, which is a small island. It's accessible at low tide. And the bird observatory that monitors the passing birds, transient birds on Hilbury Island was, oh, sorry, I'm over here looking at the thing the wrong way up, wanted to build a pond to encourage insects to feed, for the birds to feed. So before that pond was constructed, we had a look at the site. And but in the knowledge that Hilbury had already produced some very interesting early medieval finds, including this crosshead and including glass beads that were of probably 7th or 8th century date. The place name itself, Hildeberg's Eye, means Hildeberg is a woman, possibly a saint, but there was a chapel on the site in the pre-conquest period. So we are looking at an early medieval chapel on that site. And then there are little hints. I'm not doing this to show my interest in the tool handles of spades. It's really for that piece of stone in the centre, which looks awfully like a reused block of stone from some sort of medieval structure. Now, I can't prove that, but that seemed to me to be quite likely when I had a look at that piece of stone. So we dug on the site of the bird observatory pond then, and we started to find some very interesting archaeological features. And here you can see a series of post holes, very clearly defined, with stones that are used to pack the post. And those post holes cut into the bedrock, or in this case, cut into the boulder clay, a thin layer of boulder clay, but they're leaving very distinct traces in the bedrock of the site. We have here a series of cobbles that have been very deliberately laid, and they've been laid at a point where there appears to be an entrance. If you extrapolate those post holes, you can see a line of posts, and you can see that this area of cobbles is consolidating an area of hard standing where people would have passed in and out of that building. And there is our site drawn up. Here you can see the area of stones, the consolidated area of stones. This is the entranceway, and notice there is a very slight, distinctive, slight curve. Now, I'm talking about this because we're looking at Viking-Age rural settlement, and I don't have a single shred of evidence that this is early medieval, or positive evidence that this is early medieval in date. There are no datable finds from any of these features, but it's just worth noting that there are a couple of features that might push it into that Viking Age period. One is that curving line of posts, which looks very like the line of the gully that we could see at Irby and the line of that West Kirby hogback. And so it looks to me as though we may be looking at a bow-sided building. The fact there's no pottery, well, pottery, if it had been Roman in date, there would have been almost certainly pottery. If it had been medieval, 13th, 12th, 13th century onwards, there would have almost certainly have been pottery with it. So it puts this structure into that period of the early medieval period, 400 to 1066, 1100, something like that. Can't say it's Viking Age in date, but the form of it suggests to me we may be looking at a Viking Age structure. What I've tried to show is the physical excavated evidence, the archaeological evidence for Viking Age rural settlement in Wirral. We've looked very briefly at some of the other sources of evidence, which made it absolutely clear that the Viking presence, the Norwegian Scandinavian presence was well established in the northern part of Wirral, both from the place names and from the artifactual evidence, sculpture, the finds. But finally, at Irby, we began to see where people were living and the kind of buildings in which they were living. Sadly, there's very little to go with them, so we can't say much about their economy and so on. But at least we can see that through serendipity, we've managed to identify where some of these rural settlements are. At Moreton, again, serendipity, looking for a medieval chapel, found nothing, but we found this sequence of activity which embraced the Viking Age as well. And then two flyers. Hilbury, is it Viking Age? Don't know. Greasby, we'll know soon whether this site is going to fall into the right millennium even. If it turns out it doesn't fall into the right millennium, you can divert your attention to the Viking Age by looking at the phone app that Claire Downham created. That is a very, very interesting exploration of Wirral and the other side of the Mersey as well, and the northwest, this part of the northwest of England, which shows you where there are places of Viking origin. And I've talked for far too long, Steve, for which I apologise, and I will stop at that point.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Everyone can, if you want to, unmute your microphones and express our appreciation to Rob for that fantastic talk. 1, 2, 3. Very generous applause there, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, I wouldn't apologise for time because we started late, don't forget.
That's true.
With all the technical issues and everything else, waiting for people and the introduction and things. So actually that was bang on, good timing. So thanks ever so much. Now, well, if you want to ask Rob a question, maybe the best thing is if you pop your question on the chat function, and either Sue or myself can read it out, or and Rob can answer from there. But just one comment, Rob. I mean, you apologise for the sparsity of finds and things that come with these, but in all honesty, what's been discovered has been quite amazing. Really, you don't know where the parallels are. For example, in the Danelaw, where I live, which is on the border of Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire along the River Week, where there's loads of BY names. There's not that much that's been found here, really. Talking to Wendy Scott and others from PAS and things. There's thought amulets and things, but not. So I wouldn't apologise for the fact that not much. But this is a feature, isn't it? I mean, with the Romans, it's great because there's loads of things, but it's quite sad that you said because there's nothing there, then it's possibly early medieval.
Yes, it is arguing from the deeply negative, isn't it? Really,
yeah.
And that's the best we can do. I mean, it really is. That is the situation. So we have to work a lot harder to find our sites than you would have to in the east of the country, where pottery is available, or the southeast of the country, again, where you can find pottery. You can follow your Anglo-Saxon villages as they move around the landscape by looking at the places where the pottery changes in date. But in the northwest of England, we are really struggling. And so, as I say, this is why luck has played such a part in the discovery of these two sites. I think the one. I mean, I'm hoping Greasby is early medieval, because there we have the whole enclosure and we have the potential really to look at quite an important site in its entirety that hasn't been built on and that remains in reasonably good condition. So fingers crossed for that one.
It'd be brilliant, because then you've got a group emerging, Irby, Greasby,
yes,
Moreton, in that sort of North Wirral area. And then where next? I mean, we talked about it before, but Kiln Walby is another possible site. We went Tranmere Road was going to build that training ground, and then we thought, oh, great. And then they changed their minds. They moved to the solar campus in Leeso. So there are other possible sites that could be explored, I suppose.
Yes, there is a little cluster, isn't there, of these minor place names, Hesby, Stromby, which are small places, minor places, which are in Wirral, and some of those are still open ground. Kiln Walby is probably the most obvious. I didn't realise that Tranmere planned to build on that. It's a great relief that they didn't. I'd like to investigate that. I think if there's a community archaeology project out there, if anybody's interested, that's something I think we really ought to look at. I know Dean Patton is keen on doing something there as well.
Right, Rob, we've got some questions coming in.
Right, fire away.
It was, first of all, great talk. Thank you, Rob. That was from Roger Hillman. Caroline says, what was the road in Irby that was the site? I couldn't work it out from the photo. It's
Mill Hill Road, actually. It's the road that runs from Irby Village north towards Greasby. Yeah. So it's on the behind the houses on the left hand side. as you go up towards behind the last houses, actually, near the Irby Mill pub.
Okay, actually, I'm hogging the show here. Sue, do you want to read these questions out, or shall I continue?
Okay. All right. Singwall.
P4
Any
short,
plans to
P4 short.
investigate the meeting place field? Can you hear me?
Sorry, yes. What was the question? Sorry.
With Singwall, are there any plans to investigate the meeting place field?
No, there aren't. And also, I wonder how, what kind of evidence you might find if you did investigate it, actually, because as a meeting man, there may be little in terms of structural evidence that would survive from something like that, because it may not have had much of a structural component. There may be artifacts, but I think it has been metal detected. And I do believe that there was a Roman coin found there, but that was a long, long time ago, I think.
Well, to draw a parallel, actually, Rob, the Thingvellir site in Iceland, they haven't been able to pin down exactly where the site was.
Right.
Kind of surprising when you consider it's there was a major meeting place in Iceland all those years ago, but precisely for the reason you say, there's nothing structural was left behind, and then it's maybe not surprising that we can't find anything at Thingwall.
Yes, I think also the other thing I would say is it looks as though it's been quite heavily eroded. So I suspect anything that may have once been on the top of the hill may have been removed by erosion. So yeah.
Right. So when will you know about the site in Greasby?
I sent the dates off about 6 weeks ago. In about a month, I think. Yeah, 4 or 5 weeks.
Gosh, right. That's exciting. So yes, great. All right. That'll be really interesting.
Yes, I hope I'm not proved to be a complete idiot. That's the.
Well, I'm sure you're not.
It's always my fear.
And the last one, Steve, do you want to read this one? It's a long one.
No, you can. You're on a running run there, so you read it.
Okay, all right. It's from Jay, and Jay says, "Thank you for the great presentation. It's apparent the Wirral's archaeology is scattered in museums about the northwest, everywhere but the Wirral. Could you actually? We were discussing this the other day, weren't we, Steve? Could you ever see the day when we have a dedicated facility to house the Wirral's history and heritage? Thanks."
Yes and no. Actually, some of the finds are in the Williamson Art Gallery Museum in Birkenhead. So a fairly small number of the Mells finds, and I suppose that would be the obvious place. But I don't know what the politics are of Wirral Borough Council. So that's probably more your area, Steve. I suspect.
Well, we were talking about are there any sort of benevolent, sort of benefactors that might be persuaded to part with $1 million or so, probably yes. That's what it would take, wouldn't it?
That would be nice. Yeah, I think that's probably about the only way you do it, isn't it?
Well, it's quite the opposite, really, because the benevolent landowners like the Liebigings are stopping excavations. So it's I think that Sue's right. I think we need somebody because you can't ask the council to fund this, not at the moment, because it's because they've got other priorities and things, and it wouldn't make sense. But yeah.
Right.
I think someone said that Heswall was the 6th most affluent part of the UK. So if any of the rich and famous Heswall are tuning in here,
yes.
But they've got the Charles Dawson Brown Museum in West Kirby, which is I think it's quite, considering small size, is very impressive the way they lay things out.
Yes.
There's the Williamson. We do need something really. Whether I think you're right, Rob. Probably the Williamson would be the natural place, and whether there's something can be done for rotating treasures, artifacts, and things involving local museums and the Grosvenor Museum, Warrington Museum, because lots of the Mells treasures you pointed out, Robert, at Warrington. And that's fine, but if there's some, like with the Huxley Hall, when that was discovered, that was moved from museum to museum, so everyone had a chance to see this sort of stuff. Or, alternatively, replicas are made so that people can still, experience these discoveries. So there's all sorts of possibilities there, but it does require input of major funding.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, certainly to construct anything new would be impossible in the current age unless somebody comes up with a very large grant. But yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to work within the existing structures, I suspect. Yeah.
And Mary Jordan says, happy to help.
Oh, right, there we go.
Yeah, well,
has Mary got her check?
I just happen to be a local councillor for Clatterbridge Ward, actually, and our heritage champion is currently the mayor.
Right.
And I'm very keen to do whatever he can to help. So, no, there isn't the money to build something from scratch, but I'm sure if we put our heads together, we could come up with something.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds very promising. Even if it is something like rotating the material, trying to get some sort of exhibition in the Williamson that would showcase the Viking Wirral from loans that are brought in from Liverpool, Warrington, Chester. I think that would be something that would be well worth, very, very interesting to see. And there is such a keen interest in the Vikings, very largely your fault, Steve. So, sorry, I mean, credit to you, not fault. But,
your fault too, Rob. And Claire. So there's a number of us that, and David, of course, yeah. So, and the nice thing is, though, Rob, that 20 years ago, there was only a few of us sort of interested in this sort of stuff, but it seems to have blossomed almost exponentially. And Wirral archaeology, Wirral CRC should take a lot of credit for that as well. And with the Wirral Viking Trail, we've got 1,800 members, which would be absolutely. If you had 20 years ago, we'd be happy. 1,800 is incredible, really. Yeah. So, Jay, does that answer your question about the trying to get some sort of central museum or place long term? And obviously with Mary Jordan's comment as well. You can unmute, Jay, if you want to say something.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. That's answering my question. And maybe we need something big enough to house a boat, Stephen.
That's another story. And where do we start with that one, Rob?
I'll leave that to you, Steve.
I mean, that's with the boat. Hope so. You wouldn't want to mention that, but that's proving a much greater challenge than we could ever anticipate. In terms of solving that one, not because when we went down with, we went down blind, and Rob knows this. We didn't have the advantage of a trench like with what we were seeing with Irby, Moreton, and Greasby. All we could do was go down with these augers, rather like battleships, based on a drawing that was made by memory from John McRae. John McRae Senior, this chap who was working on at the site in the 1930s. So a very useful drawing that we have, and then some ground penetrating radar measurements done many years later, 2007, and a new set done in 2017. But you just don't know until you actually go down there. And when we went down with the augers, one thing we came across was underneath the surface was this large concrete slab, which was placed there, I think for good reasons, to try and secure the find. But what it's done is actually, it seems to have sank and crushed the boat, and worse, it's disturbed the sort of anaerobic waterlogged clay area, which was protecting the find. And then there was question, because it was the front of the pub. You just couldn't go down straight with these augers. You had to go down at an angle. And what seems to have happened is that we've missed whatever's left of the boat, and we've got wood, but wood which appears to come from it's all brushwood, I think, was the species, acanthus species, which dates to 600 BC to 2,500 BC. So that's not planking wood. So it appears so far we appear to have missed the boat, if that's the right phrase. But it's proving intriguing, and we've still got a lot of material left to sample from there. But we may have to ask the pub and rely on our good nature to maybe go down again, based on the information that we've obtained from the first set of measurements, which were undertaken last year. But it is an intriguing problem, and yes, I think we just don't know at this stage. But we're still quite hopeful. I think that's a reasonable comment, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting. Yeah, it was always a great challenge, wasn't it? And I think at least you've managed to do something. You've managed to recover some material. You've managed to have a look at it, and I think that's really important, because it is one of those discoveries that it's not going to improve in its preservation. So and clearly the time has led to the deterioration of the find. So better late than never, I think, would be the motto there.
Yeah, but at least, as I was telling Sue, at least what we've done is we've almost confirmed because all the car names in North Wirral, which come from Old Norse shar, which means brushwood on marshy land. To find brushwood from 600 BC or from early times perhaps confirms the fact that the terrain was even then similar to what it is today. But yeah, there's still a lot of work there needs doing.
Yeah.
Right. Has anybody else got a question for Rob before we close up? Sue?
No, I haven't. That was really excellent. I really enjoyed that. Yes. So thank you very much, Rob, for doing that. Being persuaded to give up your time to do that talk. It was really interesting.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Yeah.
Okay. So once again, folks, you can unmute your microphones and we can express our appreciation to Rob for a fantastic talk. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And we'll get this recording to you for checking. Then, if it's okay, we can get this sent out. Okay.
Great. All right, then, Steve. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And I think it was perfect. I can't. No, I was thinking all along. I don't think there's anything I would want to take out of this. So great. Thank you.
Okay. Right.
Maybe Steve. He talks
right. That sounds good. Thanks very much, and thanks for having me.
All right.
See you again soon. Yeah.
Cheers, Rob.
Yep. Bye now.
Rob, on the top right-hand corner, there should be a leave.
Oh, is there? Right. Okay.
That's right.
Have a look. Yeah, I'm trying desperately to go. Well, not desperately, but let's have a look. Okay. Right. I'll just close my machine down. I think it's probably the easiest. Thanks very much, Steve. That's
okay. Cheers, Rob. Thanks.
Yeah. See you again soon. Yeah. Keep in touch.